Hey everybody, Yankee here. Today I want to talk about something that came into me from a viewer where they were very concerned about something. They were very concerned about a recent decision by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. If you're not familiar with this decision, basically the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals recently said that even though they've upheld it in the past, now they have to strike down a federal law that says people that are charged with domestic violence, have domestic violence restraining orders against them, lose their Second Amendment rights. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal says that under the Bruin decision, there's no way they can let this stand. It's unconstitutional. Well, the person that sent me this message, they're like, is this actually a win? How do we support this without looking like monsters? How do we say this is something good without looking like we're supporting domestic violence abusers, people who abuse their spouses? Well, this has got nothing to do actually with domestic violence. This is clearly a win. It is a very positive win. And it is in no way condoning domestic violence or people that are guilty of crimes. What it is saying the government doesn't get to pass laws that say, if you're charged with a crime, we can remove your fundamental rights. Because in this country, people are supposed to be innocent until found guilty, proven guilty. Just being charged with a crime doesn't prove anything. And anyone can be charged. So to say that just under the assumption of being charged on something, the government can remove your fundamental rights, that's a very dangerous position to allow to stand. And as gun owners, we especially don't like them being able to say, we're taking away your Second Amendment rights or any rights simply because you're charged with something or someone went and got a restraining order. We don't support that at all. That's basically like red flag laws. Anybody can go down, file paperwork, and have your rights removed. That's garbage. Same thing with these DV orders. You see, to get a restraining order, it's not hard. In fact, a lot of times the people who you get it against don't even know you got one against them. It can take forever for them to even know. And once you get that order granted, that person, if they own guns, could now be a felon because they own firearms. And they didn't even know they did anything wrong. Because here's the thing, a lot of times they didn't do anything wrong. I hate to break it to people, and I know we're not supposed to say things that are non-PC, but a lot of domestic violence restraining orders are garbage. I worked in the court system through my profession, my mental health profession, for years. And I'll tell you, a lot of this is garbage. The first thing a lot of divorce attorneys do when they get a female client is they say, hey, if this is going to be a messy divorce, if you're trying to get property, trying to get custody of the kids, first thing we want to do is go down and get a DV against this guy, get a restraining order. That way he looks bad in court. When he comes into court, he has to explain why this restraining order exists, even though he's never been accused of a crime or charged or actually convicted of a crime. So a lot of times these DV orders are garbage. People use them all the time to get custody, get property, get better divorce settlements, etc. Some of these divorce attorneys, it's the first thing they do. And it's disgusting, but it happens. And here's the thing, you go in front of a judge is standing there listening to some lady saying he's threatened me, he's violent, he's dangerous to the kids, etc. What's he going to do? Not grant it? 90% of the time, they're not even going to see the other guy there. He doesn't even know this is happening. They don't even see the husband here, or the wife in some cases, I guess, but usually it's a husband. So he has to take the woman at her word, because what if he says, I don't believe you, and he doesn't issue the order and she gets beat up? Well, then he's going to probably not get reelected. So if he's in an elected position. So they grant them pretty easily. So what we're defending when we say that this Fifth Circuit Court decision is proper is we're not defending domestic violence. We're not even condoning or defending people accused of domestic violence. What we're saying is the government doesn't get to create laws and workarounds to remove people's fundamental rights without due process. And that's what these things were. Like I said, they're like red flag laws. So we cannot support those. And we can completely condemn domestic violence. I don't know anybody who doesn't. Although even when someone is charged with actual domestic violence, and sometimes when they're convicted, even then it's not this horrible thing. I know a guy in one of the cases I dealt with who got charged with domestic violence, even though both of his children testified that his mom had a black eye because she came at him with a knife trying to stab him, and he put his arm up to defend himself, hit her in the eye, gave her a black eye. When the cops came, she had a black eye, and of course she put the knife down by then. So he got charged and convicted with domestic violence. So even if someone's convicted of domestic violence, that doesn't always mean they're a horrible person. But that's beside the point. Like I said, we're not defending domestic violence. We're not defending people who get convicted of a crime. We're defending and condemning the government creating laws to remove people's rights without due process. If we allow it with this, what else do we allow it with later? Just because they're a bad guy, like they've done bad things in their life, like they were cruel to their mother and, sarcastic to their kids or whatever. They might be real total assholes, but that doesn't mean the government gets to step in and take their rights away. There's no law that says you have to be a wonderful person. Some people aren't. Just to stay away from those people. But here's the thing, like I said, that doesn't give the government's right to set standards like this. We've already seen some states trying to do it. They've tried to say, well, you only get to exercise your Second Amendment rights if we look at your internet history and we can determine that you're a good person. If you're not a good person, what we deem to be a good person, you don't get your rights. That stuff's already happening. And these DV restraining order laws that allow them to remove people's rights, that's the gateway to these things, to these ideas. That's the kind of thing where they say, well, we get to take someone's rights away if they got charged with domestic violence because we know they're risky. So why can't we determine other people are risky? That's why it was so important that this falls. It's got nothing to do with supporting domestic violence. It's got nothing to do with condoning or defending people charged with a domestic violence or even convicted. It's got to do with making sure the government doesn't get to pass these laws and enforce these restrictions that turn people into felons simply because they get their constitutional rights, their fundamental rights removed because of circumstance that happens without due process. That's what we're celebrating here. This is the kind of thing that, prior slave owners and state governments did after the slaves were freed. They got together and said, how do we create these laws that turn them into criminals and take away their rights without actually doing it, without actually going through due process, because we don't want them having their rights. That's the kind of thing that was going on after slavery was abolished. And it's the same thing now, but instead of being about race, it's about class. This is a way the government can take stuff away, rights away from people that they just deem aren't worthy of it. And that usually affects the lower middle class and below, because they usually have more incidents with this. So it's a way for the military, and not the military, but the government to make sure that the military and police are the only armed people. Because if they disarm the middle class and below, well, there's no one to oppose them, because the rich people, they already served them. So that I'm getting in a little bit of a rabbit hole here over this. But like I was saying, this isn't about supporting domestic violence abusers. This isn't about condoning anything they do. This is about supporting the rule of law, the Constitution, and how if the government wants to strip someone of their rights, they have to go through due process and incarcerate that person. Prove that person's guilty. You don't get to treat someone like a criminal just because the government wants to insinuate that they did something or accuse them of something, and you don't get to strip somebody's rights just because somebody else went down and got a little piece of paper from a judge, even though that person didn't do anything wrong, because that is unconstitutional, it's un-American, and we can support this decision wholeheartedly and very enthusiastically because it is one more in a string of huge victories for gun rights and the Constitution in this country.